freelance and then became an agent. A lot of people are doing that. Betsy Mitchell used to be the senior editor at Del Rey, and then was going to go off and be an agent, and recently came over to Open Media, which is an ebook sort of formatted company now. So that happens a lot. You'll find that going a lot back and forth. The other thing, though, is that a lot of editors started out as writers, and moved over to the editing side.
I still like to do writing. I find myself wanting to do something a little bit more stable first, and then once I've gotten myself in that sort of position, then I can write on the side.
If I remember correctly, was it Diana Lynn Jones or Diana Patterson? There was one Diana who was an editor who started writing a book mostly because she read such horrible stuff. She wanted to write a book that was worse than that, and ended up getting it sold. So, it can happen. It's a pretty big industry. Now, the other thing, the big question is, where's the industry going?
At least the trend seems to be leaning more towards digital. I, for one, can't stand digital books. I have to have the paper copy, but that's just one person having a book.
Right, but the big problem isn't so much that as when the bookstores go away, how do you sell books?
Pretty much has to be digital.
No, it can still be books. I mean, you'll have the independents still, but how do you market them? How does somebody know the next J.K. Rowling book? 50 Shades of Grey is about the only thing I can think of that I heard of that came out digital first, that broke some author out. That's one. There are tens of thousands of digital books out there. How do we find an independent digital book? That's a question that bugs me. Also, I don't like the EPUB format. There's a couple of things that it misses that books can do that it doesn't do well, and that's something that's been bothering me for a while. I almost decided to become an ebook maker back in the early 80s, mid 80s. And at the time, my editor told me, ebooks are never going to go anywhere. Maybe I should listen to myself next time.
Regardless of it being fiction or something that I'm reading for a class, I write a lot in my own books. And I thought the e-readers, the capacity is significantly limited.
1,500 books is limited?
No, the capacity to do the editing is limited.
Oh, yeah. No,
you do the annotations and whatnot. If you find something interesting, you write in the corner of the book why it's interesting. To do that on an ebook is not as
They don't have that. That's a good point.
You can highlight stuff, but that's about it. It's not like you can write in the margins of the book.
And it's not like you can put all the little yellow sticky notes.
Yeah.
I can say, flag this book.
Yeah, it just, I don't know. For me, I like that. You could do that with paper copies so much easier. And if you want to read at night, you don't have to worry, does my glare on, my battery run out,
Well,
the book's always sitting
nowadays, not so much ebooks, but the publishers are all sending stuff electronically. They'll send you, Word documents, and you'll do review markup on the side. And that's the way it's going. It's no longer printing out pages and doing red line. Anyway, we are 15 minutes into this, so I guess we should get started. Okay. So I pitched this idea to Ira. I said, if you look at it, the 3 Chinese curses, right? Somebody's taking a photograph. 3 Chinese curses are: may you live in interesting times, may you be noticed by people in high places, and may you get what you wish for. May your dreams come true. And there are these backhanded compliments that sound great until you really think about them. And I decided that, you could probably actually use them as an outline method. You could write a story to them. And you could use them in different orders. You could have that you start off in interesting times, you get noticed by people in high places, and then finally you get your wish. And then I was thinking about this and said, well, okay, so how about if we flip that around? If you start with, you get what you wish for. And quite obviously that's the wish story. You wish for something and you end up, you end up with interesting things happening because of the wish. I'm trying to read my notes here. is always hard. Let's see. I'm trying to think of a good wish story. Well, pretty much any Make-A-Wish story starts off with a wish story. You know, I wish I was a millionaire. I wish you were in a Freaky Friday. I wish you were, you know, I wish I was an adult. You know, it's a wonderful life. I wish you were never, I was never born. Okay, so that's the first part of the book. I wish we get all, I wish, you know, where he's about to jump off the bridge. And now he gets noticed by people in high places, doesn't he? I mean, you can't get any higher than heaven, and they send down the angel to try and save him and show him what happened in his old life. And then he ends up living in interesting times, finally. And, you know, the money comes in at the end, if you remember. It's a Wonderful Life. And I thought about that, and I also thought that following that same pattern, you have Star Wars and Harry Potter. You know, they both start off in interesting times. There's a rebellion, or, you know, Harry's got all this stuff going on. He gets noticed by people. Harry gets noticed by people in high places. He gets noticed by, you know, Voldemort, and Luke Skywalker gets noticed by Darth Vader. So that's his noticed by people in high places. And the wish comes true. Harry wishes to find a home, and Luke Skywalker wishes to become a Jedi like his father, and ends up doing so. So that's one way to do it. But what about if you went it the other way? You know, what happens if you started off with interesting times, and the interesting time story can be a cataclysm story, you know, earthquake, whatever, and you have, you know, you can also have something be personal in that, a personal cataclysm, and you also have the internal and the external going on. And if you're noticed by people in high places, that can be the discovery, like the Hunger Games. You know, oh, look, you're going to go off and be a warrior for your area. It can be, it seems to be something that allows you to walk into the underbellies of worlds. You're noticed by people in high places, and can be taken in a negative way. You know, it was just an interesting way of going, now could I write, you know, can you outline a story based on those things?
Tale of Two Cities.
Huh?
Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times.
Yeah.
Take
So
that.
that starts off with interesting times. So what's the next thing?
Then if you being noticed.
Okay. And so
And
finally,
then
would be the wish.
Sidney Carton at the end ends up.
Yeah, you know, it's a far, far better place I'm going to,
Yeah.
so.
Get what you wish for.
Yeah, so that's one of them. I think I had The Fifth Element under a, do you remember the movie The Fifth Element? Oh, well, The Fifth Element, it's got Bruce Willis, and it came out shortly after Die Hard, and it was mismarketed. They marketed it as science fiction, and they should have marketed it as a comedy. It's got Bruce Willis and, oh God, I don't want to get this, Gary Oldman's the bad guy. And it's just, you know, it's more high force, and it's got Chris Rush in it as well. It's a lot of fun. But it bombed at the box office because they were trying to sell it as another action adventure. But the concept behind The Fifth Element is that there's this dark evil thing that's going to come back every 5,000 years and destroy all life unless the fifth element is brought into the proper position and used to go ahead as the ultimate weapon. And at the time, the sort of opener is set just before World War I, and apparently it's not going to happen for another 300 years or so. So they're all going, oh, we got time. Then we flash forward to present day, and all of a sudden the thing is coming and bad things are happening, and they're wondering, who can we get to fight this and you know, collect the fifth element and all this, and they find, so there's your interesting times. The person they get for this, noticed by people in high places, is Bruce Willis, who is an ex-military guy, but is now a taxi cab driver, and ends up bumping into the fifth element, who actually surprisingly ends up being a woman. And so we have a whole love story going on. And finally, you know, he's been kind of wishing for the perfect woman, so that's how it ends up when he gets his wish. But it's, you know, that's the bones, the barest meat of the whole story. But it really is a lot of fun. Um, so I do think, though, that you can kind of, not necessarily do the acts per se, but certainly get the structure just by going with, interesting, noticed, and wish. What are they? So it's a way to do a story. Let's see what else I had. Also, it was kind of interesting. This is funny. My kid was in surgery on Wednesday, and while they were prepping him for surgery, we were talking this over, and I just to distract him. But my kid is very insightful and said, well, this is a great way of looking at motivations and opposing forces as well, between your hero and your anti-hero, and talking about how you can balance within a story in tragedy and also in a non-tragedy that deals with character. How does your character respond to these interesting times? How does your character respond to giving you a wish and things like that? So we were looking at that and trying to pull it back. And then we started talking about trilogies, which is an interesting, they're on topic in a different place. But that was the gist of it. So did you want to try and do one? Have you got a story you're working on? I was going to say you're editing, so I don't know, but I don't know what you're doing.
I don't write, I read.
Uh-huh.
I'm here to have fun this weekend,
Okay, cool.
and I'm a reader.
Okay.
That's,
All right. So did you see?
your idea of the Chinese curses, and now following up on the outline piece of it, would you consider creating or writing the story using whether it's Chinese curses or Shakespearean themes or something, some kind of structure like that? How would you write something this way and apply an outline?
Well, I'm sort of still groping for that myself. I think that for a quickie outline, though, this works nicely in terms of raising the questions you want to answer. Like where am I going to start first, and what sort of world does that build for me? Interesting times seems to be the one where a lot of things start off, and so what interesting times do I need?
How do you build that world?
How do you build it? Yeah, exactly.
Take the world and twist it enough that it is interesting and establish that
Well,
as an interesting world.
interesting times is, times of war, times of famine, times of oppression, or simply personally interesting times, like you've been in a car accident, or, one that combines kind of the wish with interesting, you just won $1 million. What are you going to do next? We're going to Disneyland. Now, that sort of thing. So building, I've been trying to grow up with this myself. Okay, where can I get a story from? But they almost all pop up. It's like, all right, so interesting times. Boy meets girl, right? But boy and girl are, I just stole from Romeo and Juliet. Boy and girl are on opposing teams, right? That's Romeo and Juliet, right there in a nutshell. I don't think Shakespeare got all the story ideas. I know that people say all basic story ideas are done and told, and I don't disagree with that, but it's what's different that makes things enjoyable. Yeah.
I've read somewhere that there's only like 36 situational factors that can be done, and when people start putting numbers on things, that's where I start to not like it so much. These are good ideas, but there are things that don't quite fit into any of them.
Yeah, but some people love pigeonholing. And also a lot of this stuff is kind of like standard stories. It's like when you get to science fiction, the story's all the same. Sometimes, maybe not. And that's part of the reason science fiction's out there, is to say, what happens if we take our society and throw this twist at it? How do we think people will respond? And that's one of the reasons I like science fiction. Fantasy kind of does the same thing. I had somebody argue that science fiction is better than fantasy. The differences are, with fantasy, you go a lot further, and you can just go, basically, with fantasy, you can walk into complete bizarro land if you want. Alice in Wonderland is sort of an example of that. But whereas with science fiction, you try not to go quite to bizarro land. But it doesn't mean you can't tell interesting and challenging stories in fantasy. For all that Harry Potter has its flaws, some of the stuff she put in there is just like, the whole concept that you can't trust the newspapers? Well, actually, the first one, you know this, Harry, not all wizards are good. Translation for kids. No, this, child, not all adults are good. You know, and that was huge, subversive. The newspapers lie to you, subversive. Governments lie to you, subversive. Governments will incarcerate people who are innocent only to affect, you know, to solve public opinion. Like, wow. I mean, so that's one of the things I love about the Harry Potter series is she put in all these things, and we're gonna be seeing the implications of that for the next 50 years easily as kids grow up and they don't trust the government, they don't trust the newspapers. They're going to be questioning a lot of stuff. Yippee! So to say that fantasy can't make a major influence, I don't agree with that. For that matter, Lord of the Rings, well, it's very much a Christian fantasy had an influence, and the Narnia series too. Well, off topic on my Chinese Christian. Actually, there's a really cool book that's mostly unread by people called Bridge of Birds by a guy named Barry Huart. Bridge of Birds. And his name is Huart, Hughart. Nowadays you can get an ebook format as the Chronicles of Master Lee or something like that, which is all 3 books. Bridge of Birds is definitely the best. It's the first one. It is the tale of an ancient China that never was. And it's a keeper story, basically. But a very, very beautiful book. I've been rereading it now for the past, since it's been published. So I just recently reread it again. It's just nicely done. It's got when you're reading a book a lot, you start finding out where it falls apart and it doesn't flow quite as fast as you'd like and things like that. But it's a masterful book, and it's set in this ancient China, and it's kind of like it's a wow book. The next one is called The Story of the Stone. It's kind of not so wow. And then the final one is called 8 Skilled Gentlemen, and it's even less wow, unfortunately. Part of it was because I think he was one of those guys that went through publisher hell. It's kind of like he published the first book, and then the publisher went out of business. And that really messes things up. And then he finally found somebody else, and that one went out of business. And it's just, and other thing I heard is apparently he's independently wealthy now, and so he doesn't feel the need to write. But an interesting thing, because it was a Chinese curse story. What happened? The opening premise, the big question in the first part of the book is, how does a plague learn to count? Because something was happening in this little village, and all the children between 8 and 13 were basically going catatonic. So the question was, how does a plague learn to count? And our poor number 10 ox, who is the narrator of the story, but not necessarily the hero, is sent off to Peking or some nearby big city to go find a wise man to help them find out why a plague can learn to count. So interesting times. Noticed by people in high places right after that to finally gets what he wishes for. But still, and the reason I bounced into that, of course, is because it's a Chinese story and these are Chinese curses. I will say that if you're versed in Chinese history, I have it from a person who is Chinese, that she doesn't like this book because it plays with her culture in ways she doesn't like. But reading it as a regular old person who's never read anything from China before, it's going like, wow, this is fun. And it's a nice caper story. So you read a lot? What's your favorite stuff?
Used to read a lot of science fiction.
Did you read Lord of Light by Roger Slasky?
Pardon me?
Lord of Light by Roger Slasky.
Yes. All the Chronicles of Amber.
Yeah, Amber, Lord of Light is still awesome. He did a sequel, or not quite a sequel, he did something with Egyptian culture, and it really didn't work for me. It's kind of like, but Lord of Light was awesome. Have you read Lord of Light?
I have not. Was it like a failed Stargate or?
No.
I'm not even.
So the last name would have been the 70s. This is the 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are the Egyptian sci-fi that I use.
No, it's well, for that matter, you can get Anubis Gates by Tim Powers.
And it states,
Yeah.
and it's pretty good, or?
Well, I think it won a Hugo or a Debbie. Certainly, well, Tim Powers. Tim Powers wrote On Stranger Tides, which got optioned and became the fourth Pirates of the Caribbean movie. He's kind of an interesting guy. What else did you read? What else, you read mostly science fiction? Are you all science fiction now? Because we all sort of move around.
I haven't really been, I read it as a child. This is all that I grew up on, the classics on, and I've got Astounding and Amazing, all of that. I read a lot of that, 60s, 70s, 80s.
Oh, wow.
And I kind of stopped, and now these went up into the working world, and now I'm getting back into them.
Yeah.
So.
Well, nowadays I tend to read more urban fantasy when I'm reading fantasy or fiction at all. And I've been having fun with Sean McGuire, who's got a fairy changeling world that crosses over in at the San Francisco Bay Area. And the first book in that is called Rosemary and Rue. Did you read Lois McMaster Bujold's stuff, though?
No, not that. I think I read one or two, and I wasn't very interested in that.
Well, it depends upon where you start. Well, I mean, it's caper story usually. The first two weren't, or what became one book. But she's, wow, she really can throw it down. She tends to write sort of interior psychological stuff a lot, which is pretty interesting, whereas David Weber is almost in the same space because of writing space opera, but he's writing geopolitical, external stuff. You're not really in people's heads as much as you are in the whole politics of what's going on. So it's really weird to look at the two of them. It's like, were you guys like, being given notes or something? You write this, I'll write that. But lots of fun stuff there. Of course, you've read Jim Butcher, right?
I have not.
Oh.
This is I get to be here and get to kind of learn, and that's right.
Well, he wrote The Dresden Files, which became a very bad TV show. And he gets better with each book, which is really annoying for the rest of us. He really is building on it. So his first book will not be as good as his 10th or 11th book. But he also has a fantasy world. His Harry Dresden is a wizard in Chicago. And I've forgotten the name. Is it Stormfront?
Yes, the first book?
Yeah.
Stormfront.
Wow, my God, my brain's good. So the first one's Stormfront, which is not as good as the next one, which is not as good as the next one. So you gotta cut him some slack. Ditto for Sean McGuire's Rosemary and Rue October Day series. The first one, you kind of hope for this actually, that the first one is not as good as the sixth or the seventh one, that people get better as they go along. But she's a nice, I like her writing style a lot. I like his writing style a lot. He keeps on topping himself so much though that I'm kind of afraid to read the next book. It's like, what now? But, really masterful stuff. What else is out there that I've been reading lots of recently? I've bounced around a lot. I'm reading a lot of nonfiction, World War II history stuff, because I was a World War II history buff for a long time. What's your day job? You know Ira, so you've got something.
I used to work with Iris.
That must be scary.
I know him from the working world.
Uh-huh.
So I'm a technology project manager.
Technology.
So I read, if we look at hard sciences, I used to read a lot of, I still do a lot of science. And astronomy science, all of that is, that's what we do, where my husband and I were interested in those kinds of things.
Oh, cool.
But earlier as a child and growing up was worlds. So, Narnia, of course, Narnia Oz started with those, and then went on through their permanent course, started over. Andre Norton was fabulous.
Andre Norton
All of
was fabulous. She was the first, really.
She was just wonderful.
She was.
Of course, Ursula K. Le Guin, and that's what I had grown up with. Ringworld, of course, Foundation, all of these kinds of things.
Yeah, Foundation is kind of dated now, but it's still a great idea.
It's very dated, although I'll tell you, I was at in another meeting with people. We're talking about big data, and we're talking about how big data is all coming together and all this information. And I'm thinking, okay, it's psychohistory.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've been moving there for a long while. And a lot of people who've been working in big data would have probably read the Foundation Trilogy or heard of it.
Right, and this is all that it is, and I see this coming together, and it's, oh, okay, it's actually great, almost validating to see that this is something that was thought up in the 50s.
Yeah.
And now here is we're seeing the manifestation of that.
Although Isaac was convinced that, or at least the premise in Isaac's Foundation Trilogy was you needed, trillions of people, not millions. You needed to get closer to a volt's worth of people, Avogadro's numbers worth of people, which is kind of 6 by 10 to the 23rd. It's going to be a lot more than we got right now.
Close to the 27th, they found it, but
No,
23rd.
23rd, 6.023 by 10 to the 23rd, if I remember correctly.
For one mole. However, when we go back to what was happening, is looking at Trantor as the example and saying, okay, I can take Trantor as a representative sample. And is that not the same thing that we are doing now when we look at, do we have to have 1 trillion people? Do we have to have that many people? It's like, no, this is one of the later books. But then he said, okay, I can go around and I can take the different places within Trantor as a way to establish the algorithms for us. That book is
It's possible. I don't know. We'll see clearly, because big data now gets to the point where it can do that sort of stuff, which is also rather scary.
very scary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, gee, they know more about me than I do. Why do they know more about me than I do? So it's going to be, talk me up on one of the side for, I kind of want, either I want to be paid for people knowing more than I know about myself, or I want my privacy, please. So anyway, so we're sort of off the Chinese curses and into books world. What have you been reading?
Me, as of late,
You've got schools.
I'm sorry.
You've got schools, so they get this recommended reading or required reading list.
Yes and no. More required reading than recommended, but I took 2 genre classes, one in horror and one in fantasy. And the reading list for both of those were quite lovely, though extensive. And for fantasy was more recently took, and I had all the 3 Lord of the Rings, Alice in Wonderland, some of Beowulf, Going into the Green Knight, the Wizard of Earthsea, the very first one, and 2 anthologies about that big of short stories for one semester, which was really fun. But it was basically just a survey of the oldest fantasy to some of the more current pieces, and I really enjoyed, Lord of the Rings I tried when I was younger. I don't think I quite had the mentality to appreciate it, because I got about 200 pages into the Fellowship of the Ring and I put it down. It was very shameful. And then I picked it up again, and it was so much more enjoyable. Loved Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, just for the writing style of it and how peculiar and yet brilliant it was, that this girl could make nonsense sensible. So for more of a technical aspect, I thought that was wonderful. For my own recreational reading, I really liked Maxwell Alexander Drake. He writes the Genesis of the Oblivion series. It's a fantasy. And the first one's called Farmers and Mercenaries. I went to 2 or 3 panels of his at another con, and really enjoyed his writing and bought the book. Really enjoyed the book.
Cool.
It's he's a very, I guess I liked his style because he writes like I do, where it's extremely technical and thought out and methodical. So, and you can track that through the book, and it makes the story make more sense. But it's all different kinds of narrators, fantasy style world that's pretty tangible and believable. So it's pretty cool.
So today you're not reading much of any fiction?
Not at the moment. I just left a book group that had a whole list of the revealing literature, and I didn't like the last few. So there was a book we just read that was all modern literature, and in terms of the science fiction, fantasy, I have not read. I've not read much lately. That's actually work in the real world and history. Of actually, there is a lot of history and science and things like that we end up reading. So now this is a weekend to escape and have fun.
came up with the idea that we could do that you could use that as a quick and dirty outline technique. And then I went back, trying to go ahead and say, one, how could I use it? Which I haven't succeeded so far, only because it's a fairly new idea to me. But I did go and look and start, like I said, the Richard Burns, sort of like, okay, this works this way, and Harry Potter works that way. So I've started looking at it. I do believe it's only a short game. It's not a full outline, it's not anything like that, but it's kind of like, it's more like guidelines, as they said in Pirates of the Caribbean. You just sort of, let's go see what we can do here. Can this work? Yeah.
Looking at your previous outline and then the Chinese curses, the Chinese curses seem more plot-driven, whereas your outline seems more character-driven. I'm just trying to figure out.
No, I think that makes some
Could you
sense.
put them together, or?
Well, you should probably. I mean, at some level, the Chinese curses are Act 1, Act 2, Act 3.
Oh.
Like when you maybe. I mean, they could also be something else. But it would seem like if I wanted to, here quickly write a short story to these things. Here's Act 1, here's Act 2, and here's Act 3. But you said, how do you world build this? And that's kind of where I would stop. I sat down, as I said, my kid got hit by a car, and I've been dealing with the aftermath of that, which kind of derailed a lot of things. But I did try and look at, okay, could I write a short story with that? And really where it pulls you to is the world building. What is the interesting time? So it's more, not so much, maybe not plot, because the argument is made between plot and character. And I think the people who know what they're doing will all agree that plot is character, character is plot. You can't change one without changing the other. And you get to a certain point where that happens. Now, a lot of people, I personally am probably more character-driven than plot-driven. So I'll find, I'll take somebody and put them in a situation. I wrote a short story because I've been asked to with dragons in it. And my hero is a guy who basically is a pushover. Because his wife, or what became wife, or actually became mate more than wife, is a dragon, a shape-changing dragon. And so the right answer to a dragon is pretty much whatever you want, please don't eat me. So his survival, his strategy, his brilliant strategy was basically most of the time to shut up and say nothing. And it was part of like, okay, how can I tell a story about somebody who's a nebbish, as it were? Actually, he's not really a nebbish, he's just smart. And over time they have obviously fallen in love because the story starts with the whole problem with their adolescent child who discovers that she too is a dragon. It was a fun little short, but it was kind of interesting. Where I started was with the character. I started with the times as well because the character is actually saying, he's quoting a reference he's trying to write because he's a scholarly guy on dragons, and it's sort of like, things not to do with the dragon, don't inflame them, you'll get burned, But it's actually being coined in such a way that people might be tempted to do this, challenge a dragon to a duel because they're after your gold. Because really what he's trying to do is put some literature out there that'll get more idiots to come along and challenge his wife because she wants the gold. And then I figured out why dragons need gold, at least in this universe. So a lot of world building, but the characters were he was there first. So that's where I go. A lot of other people go with the plot first. I want to see what happens if. So at some level they're looking at the interesting times. Maybe I'm looking more at the wish, I don't know. I don't think it quite fits all that way per se, but it can. And it's just, you end up with a toolbox full of stuff that you can use to say, okay, now with looking at this, I may go back and look at myself and say, well, now have I done this? Do I have an interesting time? Do I have a wish? Is it a requirement for every story to be written this way? I don't think so. But will I discover that if I go looking for it, I find it in every story? That would be interesting. Because we're pretty much convinced, you would probably agree with this, that storytelling is a very, very old thing, that we've been doing it forever, and there's a particular way of doing it because it is an information exchange at some level. You may want to know how to survive a fire-breathing dragon that likes eating humans. Might be useful. or you want to understand what it's like to be in this situation where the only way to win is to lose gracefully. What's that like? How do I tame the dragon?
How do
So-
I roll?
Huh?
If the objective is don't eat me, then how does one have a world, and how do people, the human race, even survive? How many dragons are there?
Not enough.
And
Dragons are not. Dragons, unfortunately, are generally they're very territorial. My heroine dragon, the mommy dragon, as it were, whose name is unpronounceably Elveth, she inherited her hoard of gold when she murdered her mother. You know, that's what you do. You kill your mom, or she kills you. So the whole problem is now she's got a daughter, and you know, it's like, you know, you got to go get your hoard. You're not killing me, and there's this poor human husband who's like just discovered that his daughter will live forever because she is actually a dragon that can transform back from human to dragon.
But what about all the other people? How do they have a society? How do the other people not get eaten?
Yeah. Well, knights do this. I mean, knights go off and they challenge dragons, and sometimes they win and sometimes they lose. Most of the times, you know, the way we get it set up, they lose. But there are not that many dragons. They're very, very few because they're territorial and they kill each other. And that's one of the reasons why my female dragon has a male human partner, because there aren't that. You know. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of world building, but a lot of that happened sort of like within the sentence, the opening paragraph. You know, sort of just popped into existence that way. How does this work? You know, I want to tell this story. So a lot of it is I want to tell this story. I'll invent the world that fits the story. You know, that's a lot of what you do. Some people invent the world and try and fit a story into it. I find that a lot harder. Invent the situation and then build a world that makes it work. In science fiction, it becomes a little bit more difficult, but even Heinlein said, ask the experts, they'll tell you why you can't do something, then go and do it. You know, because I mean, the fun part about science nowadays is according to what we think now, dark matter and dark energy make up 94% of the known space, which means we at the very best, which we know we aren't, could maybe only know 6% of what's going on. That's not even a failing rate in any test I've ever heard. It's like, really? We know nothing. So from a science fiction and even from a scientific point of view, it's like, wow, we know nothing. We've got so much more to discover. That's cool. I didn't ask you, what do you read and what Chinese curses do you use?
I read a lot. The ones that I'm the most invested in reading right now, Dresden Files, and I've been chomping at the bit for Skin Game, and I read through the series for this 5th or 6th time, just waiting for Skin Game. But I've been going back to some of the earlier writings, because I've got the story in mind, and I don't know how long it's going to be, but it's not going to be a short one, and I'm pretty sure it's noir. So I've been reading a lot of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett recently. That's kind of been at the forefront. But I'm a big Game of Thrones geek. Jordan's Wheel of Time took up all of my reading. Anytime there was anytime one of the books would come out, whatever I was reading to pass the time, I just set it aside until I was finished with it. Terry Goodkind's Sword of Truth, which I actually got turned on to because of the Legend of the Secret TV show. So there's that. Actually, you mentioned World War II history, which reminded me one of my favorite series is actually an alternative history by Eric Turtle. That was fun. But yeah, so I read a lot of non-fiction, like a lot of history stuff, especially stuff dealing with Rome, both the Republic and the Empire. So yeah, that's for the most part what I read. My wife got me into reading some young adult stuff, particularly a lot of John Green's novels, which it's fun. It's a section of reading that I haven't really gotten into since I was a young adult. But it's been pretty fun reading.
Yeah, The Fault in Our Stars is the latest fiction that I finished. Still kind of digesting it. I think he cheated on that one. I understand that he was writing about something that had actually happened in his life, but have you read it?
Oh, what was it called?
Scott Green's The Fault in Our Stars.
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
Okay. Well, I then shouldn't give it away.
That's okay.
Yeah, but he's written some pretty good stuff. Which was the first one, I guess?
I'm looking for Alaska.
No, I started that, and I got turned off by all the smoke, and it's kind of like, I really don't need that. I'm trying to remember which one it was. Something else that I read recently, too. But, actually, I didn't find out, I think. Oh, there you go. My little idiot tablet. Excuse me for a moment, I'll go look. Although, come to think of it, that book kind of fits in fairly nicely on that level too, in the Chinese curse level, because she starts off with the curse of she's going to die of cancer and so on. That's the fault in our stars. And she has a wish, and she lives an interesting time. Okay, so wait a minute. I was reading, looking for Alaska. Okay, you don't have all my books on you, do you? Evil Machine. I've been having a lot of fun with Patricia Briggs's Moon Cold series. She's got werewolves and other things. And the heroine herself is a skin-changing coyote shapeshifter.
Ooh.
And then, of course, this is Shauna McGuire's, this is the second one in this series. She's got this encrypted series. It's urban fantasy set in New York City, at least the first two. And it's kind of like, the basic idea is that there are monsters out there, and not all of them are bad. But there is the Covenant, which has decided that anything that's not human cannot know the joy of the Lord, or whatever else, and so it must be killed. Which kind of, is a problem. All right, but yeah, he was interesting. Did you do the Percy Jackson series yet?
I actually have. Every time I intend to start it, someone else comes up to me and says, "Oh my God, you gotta read this book." Okay, so I can't say no to book suggestions. But
Lightning Thief, right?
First one's Lightning Thief. I discover books a large part of the times nowadays by asking librarians, because they'll tell you what's popular. And the Lightning Thief was the latest big new thing. It was right after Harry Potter. Well, actually, Twilight was right after Harry Potter, but funnily enough, librarians weren't recommending it. My kid at the time was 12, and there's a really cool book that's on like the 5th or the 6th or the 7th grade reading list called Touching Spirit Bear by a guy named Ben Michelson. Great book. Sort of fiction, but not general fiction, I'd say. Basically, we start off with this disturbed boy who's beating another boy, black and blue, and we learn along the way that this boy is not everything terrible that we thought. But it was a really cool book. So after that recommendation from my kid, you've got to read this. This is wonderful. I go, yeah, it really is. Along comes Twilight, and I give it a whirl, and 4 pages into it, and I come back and I say, wait a minute, he's a vampire and she's an idiot. Why should I read this book? And my kid says, but it gets better in the last chapter. But I'm not reading the whole book for the last chapter. And then since then, of course, my kid, as a guilty pleasure, read all 4 of them, and turned around and finally has become a very virulent anti-Twilight person because the message in the book is pretty negative. Did you read the Twilight series?
I started it and hated it. Something fierce.
Good place.
So I think I read maybe the first chapter and gave up on it.
Yeah, like as I say, 4 pages. Slush pile. 4 pages and done. But God knows it made a lot of money. So did the Hunger Games, and I started reading a sample of that and went, no, and then was was told I had to see the movie, and I saw the movie, and I kind of still went,
I didn't like them. I saw the movie for Hunger Games, I didn't really like it, and I tried to read Lightning Thief, I didn't like it.
Lightning Thief is fun. Lightning Thief, I like the entire series, and then he's got another here, another series, is that Heroes of Olympus or something? That it's following on from it. He's basically doing Greek mythology. See, the thing I loved about it was his kids, he was a middle school teacher, and he still is. He's a very rich middle school teacher now. But one of his kids had dyslexia and the other had ADHD, or maybe it was the same kid. What he came up with was a reason why ADHD wasn't a bad thing and dyslexia wasn't a bad thing. ADHD basically half-bloods are children of humans and the gods. And so the idea is that if you're one of those, you're pre-programmed to go ahead and read ancient Greek, and that's why you have dyslexia with everything else. And at the same point, you have all these battle reflexes because you're looking for anything that might come along and kill you at any moment. So yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun, especially where he did a little bit where he had words jumbled up in a dyslexic style and showed us, the regular, normal, non-dyslexic readers, how hard it would be to unscramble with stuff. So yeah, it was fun. And is it great literature? You know, although, did you ever see Star Trek 4?
Yes.
Okay, do you remember the bit where they're talking about old books and Daniel Steele and Spock says, the classics, you know. We don't know what's going to be a classic hundreds of years from now. Yeah, so.
I don't know, I think it was probably just the mind frame in which I read it. I was a little bit of a prude when I was younger. So when other kids were reading popular literature, all I wanted was my Edgar Allan Poe anthology, and I wouldn't read anything else.
Did you do Emily Dickinson at all?
Yes.
Oh, she's gorgeous.
Yes, she was fun. I love Byron. Mary Shelley is perhaps one of my favorites. I've read Frankenstein 3 times.
Wow. Well, but she, I consider her the mother of both science fiction and horror.
Yes.
And
I read Frankenstein first in just a British literature survey course, and then I read it again in horror, and then again in a 19th century kind of Enlightenment Victorian transition period where it was more viewed as science fiction, and having those 3 different perspectives on it was really interesting. It does play into the science fiction because
it's science fiction.
It could, at the time period, it was something that was believed that.
Well, the whole playoff of this, they were talking about, well, you know this, the whole Giovanni's work with electricity in frogs' legs, and so there was a scientific basis for it. We could make frog leg moves. How come we can't just build a new human? And of course, we're still trying to build new humans. So.
Yeah, it was just that book is a masterpiece. Wonderful.
Yeah, it's an interesting world. Well, we're almost out of time on this panel.
It's been very informative. Thank you.
Well, it was what it was.
It was fun.
That's all it has to be.
Now I have books I have to read.
This is good. We like giving you new books to read. This is important.
I haven't had as many as I would like to read lately, so I have a good list.
Why not?
I don't know. Time, and it's kind of hard to filter through what looks good and what doesn't look good when the bookstores are limited in quantity more than they used to be, and looking online, I don't know, something that has a pretty cover art doesn't necessarily make a good book.
Yeah.
So while, the artist may be fantastic, read the first, like the little sample pages they give you, like, I don't like this right away, and even like the recommended stuff isn't always very accurate. It's harder to go through, whereas if you go to a bookstore, I want to read science fiction. There's the science fiction section, I'm going to look through that.
Yeah, and you can pull books out and they'll put them up, and you don't have to actually open them up at sample chapter they gave you. You can open it up in the middle, and stuff like that, and you can read that beautiful blurb on the back or the inside cover blurb and stuff like that. Yeah.
So much more informative than just here you can read the prologue.
And worse than that, Amazon is so big, and I'm pretty sure all the others are like that, where it's like they know what you bought, and so they'll recommend more of the same, and it's like, are you nuts? Why would I want to read the same? Just because I like this book doesn't mean I'm going to like another book that's basically a repeat.
That's, Just you'll buy one thing and then it's, oh, here's 15 other things that are all on the same premise, that
Yeah.
are basically the same story, just a rehashing of it.
Yeah, it's like, no, give me something off the,
Yeah, and
let me
even,
go there.
even with, I don't know, I found it particularly hard with science fiction, because it's sailing super heavy into Star Trek. Wonderful. And then I tried to read some of the Star Trek books, and I never liked any of them. Even, there was one called IQ, which was about Q himself, and he's one of my favorite characters. I just wanted to read this book. And I got about halfway through, I don't think they know what this character is. I don't think they really realize what Q is. So, I don't know, I think that kind of put me off on the,
Probably my
sure.
only enjoyable Star Trek book was How Much for Just a Planet. It was old Trek.
How much for just a planet?
How Much for Just a Planet. It's these, they and I think it's the Klingons around, one set of bad guys are trying to cut a deal over a planet, and the people on the planet are basically doing Gilbert and Sullivan works to go ahead and dissuade everybody and make them not do it. So they finally get to the point where Kirk is sitting there, how much for just the planet? We really don't want your society. We'll put you someplace. How much for just the planet? So it's a little bit of fun. It's nothing. Well, now wait a minute. If you're looking for stuff to read, did you read Gordon Dixon's Time Storm?
I did not. What is that?
Oh, have you read Time Storm? Would have been
I
ages
don't
back.
remember, I don't remember Time Storm. If that's
Time
what-
Storm would have been either late 70s, early 80s.
And
Gordon
Dixon Time Storm?
Yeah, Gordon Dixon wrote classics in science fiction, the Dorsey trilogy, Soldier Astronaut, what's the next one? Dorsey's the first one, that's right, I forgot. But they're kind of dated now too. But he also wrote a nice little alternate fantasy thing called The Dragon and the George, where he's looking at the world from the dragon's point of view, which is a lot of fun. But Time Storm is cool because it's science fiction. Basically, we don't know how time works, and the possibility was that a time storm passes through, and basically you have different times on your planet now. The surface of the planet is now broken up into different times, and you can walk from today to the 1700s to whatever, and because time got broken.
That sounds kind of awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Also, if you're going to go, this is old science fiction still, but do you remember Paul Anderson's Fire Time?
I don't remember that specific one, but Paul Anderson. Yes.
Paul Anderson wrote some good stuff, but Fire Time was pretty cool. It was an alien world, and you had centaur-like creatures and a whole bunch of other stuff going on. It still sticks in my memory.
Paul Anderson, what was his name?
Fire Time.
Fire Time?
Mhm. All right, I should probably disappear this time to the new film.
Just to go back through like the Hugo lists and just go through the Hugo and Nebula Award nominees.
There's a lot of,
There's a lot of them, but just as a list and who are those authors. It's like, here's the top 100 movies to see. Here's just start to go through some of those lists.
Yeah.
Fun, thank you.
Get the one or two liner, and then at least for me, that's what I do. Every time I start to go into something else. It's like the history books right now. We're going through a lot of World War I now as well as World War II history. But it is what are the top books, and we start to read that. And
There was a-
biographies.
there was a really good World War, there was a good one on Paris, it's called Paris 1919. They're talking about the Versailles Treaty and everything going on there, and it's insane how dumb those people were.
Yeah.
And then there's another one that sort of ties in an odd way called, I think it's Numbers of War, which is about Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam and the whole French Indochina thing. And it goes all the way back to when Ho Chi Minh was there in 1919, trying to beg the world powers, particularly Wilson, to go ahead and set Indochina free.